I am live. I'm reading The Laird and the Lady. It's a novel by Joan Marshall Grant. It was published in 1949 and it was her only novel. Her other books, her 7 books she wrote, were her stories about her own previous lives, reincarnations. She passed away in 1989 and I love her books. I am here coming to it's almost coming to the end. It's the story of Rowan and Marylda. She is an American heiress, millionaires, and he owns a castle in the Highlands of Scotland. Anyway, you have to read the other bits. Fealty, chapter 15. At 10:30, Rowan returned from a reconnaissance and reported that the maids had gone to bed. Marylda stubbed out her cigarette and rose from the cushions on which she had been sitting, staring into the fire. "All set," she said. "I'll go and change. If you don't mind, I'd rather be alone until we start." "Duncan and I will wait in my dressing room till you want us," said Rowan. "He's left his things in there." Marylda was surprised that she felt so calm, though already she could feel her pulse beating more rapidly. For the second time she put on the white satin dress, which she had chosen to increase her resemblance to Emilie. She found it much easier to do her hair than it had been on New Year's Eve, almost as though her fingers were familiar with the way the pins must be placed to keep it high on her head. She fastened the emeralds around her neck, slit the heavy ring on her marriage finger. Then she drew the curtains back from the window and stood looking up at the moon. "Please God, let it be all right, please God." She opened the door of the dressing room and the 2 men followed her in silence down the gallery. Rowan wondered why she had made them open the turret stairs, as she appeared not to be going to use it. Outside the nursery she handed him an electric torch and asked him to go down to the hide and light the candles. "Come back when you have lit them," she added. "I want to see their light shining up when I go into the room." She asked Duncan for a cigarette and took several puffs before she threw it out of the window. "All right?" he asked, anxiously. Her eyes were beginning to take on the remote expression he had seen in them after he found her lying on the floor of the room they were about to enter. "Are you all right?" he said more urgently. "What did you say?" She spoke as though she had forgotten he was there. "Oh, yes, I'm quite all right, only rather disassociated." She smiled at Rowan as he opened the door and spoke in her normal voice. "Last-minute instructions. The first bit may be rather unpleasant, but whatever happens, you mustn't interrupt. I shall try to do what I did last night, give a kind of running commentary on what actually took place. It's possible that I may start talking in the first person, either as Hector or Roderick. If I seem to be running out of energy, concentrate very hard on giving me as much of yours as you can spare. Remember that the first stage will be me recording what happened. The second stage is more difficult. I've got to change the pattern of their thought and make them see and hear me, or rather Emilie, so vividly that it breaks the chain of repetition which is binding them here." She kissed them both and walked ahead of them into the room. "Sit on the window seat," she said, "and smoke if you like, but whatever happens, don't interrupt." She glanced up at the beam and dragged the rocking horse a few inches forward so that its saddle was exactly below the ringboard. There was a long silence. Duncan fought against the desire to cough. Rowan felt cramp threatening the calf of his leg, but managed to take off his shoe and bend his toes back without making a noise. The clock boomed in a slow midnight. "Hector and Roderick are in the room," said Marylda. "They're standing close to the door. Both are in full dress. There is a rope hanging from the ceiling. There is a noose at the end of the rope. Hector is calm, but Roderick is close to hysteria. Hector is angry with him for behaving in such an unseemly manner. Hector considers that, as the decision has been reached, any delay is discreditable to them both. Roderick, please pull yourself together. I thought we had finished with arguments." Her voice now had the authority of a man who is used to being obeyed. "Yes, no doubt you think I'm mad. However, I am not interested in your opinion. I happen to believe that this is the only way in which I can defend my wife and my son, the chief to whom in a few minutes you will owe allegiance from suffering as I have done in the last 2 years. Roderick, even if you were able to carry out your threat, knock me out and put me under what you call proper care, what would be the result? I assure you that I'm not insane. No doctor would certify me. I should, however, be driven to take the only other course open to me. I would make a full confession. You see, Roderick, there is no way in which you can deprive me of retribution. I will die by hanging. If you will not act as my executioner, then you condemn me to the extra unpleasantness of a trial and the services of the public hangman. Are you such a weak friend, Roderick? If so, how fortunate that you no longer disgrace the title of Master of Cadry, which you ceased to bear some 7.5 hours ago. You asked me to consider my son's feeling when he learns that his father was a suicide. Have you so soon forgotten the details of the service I demanded after you had given me your oath of fealty? Let me remind you, for soon I shall not find it so easy to make you listen, unless you also have the disability of the sight. You will pretend to have found my body after life is extinct. You will go to Robbie and show him the note I have given you, demanding the last service you are able to render me, to carry my body to such place as you may consider convenient, and discharge a shotgun at my face. This should be sufficient to convince a police that I died from a shooting accident, and will remove the awkward evidence of strangulation. Robbie will say he heard the shot at dawn. If the police find it difficult to believe that I wish to shoot at such an early hour, they will no doubt attribute it to the sleeplessness attendant on my excitement at fatherhood. The less charitable will say that I was too drunk to know what I was doing. There are advantages in having a reputation for a certain lack of sobriety. You will keep this note carefully. Should you bungle the plans I have so carefully made, you may require it to save your own neck from a rope. My plans have been very exact, Roderick. I have studied the subject of hanging with some care. It would have been better had the room been a couple of feet higher, but I think the plank I have set on the 2 trestles will provide sufficient drop. I gather that if the rope were unduly long, it might pull my head from my body, a trifle which would not concern me, but would render your further operations more distressing and possibly make them ineffective. Roderick, for God's sake, control yourself. On you depends the future of my family. No one must be able to say I died as either a suicide or a murderer. Will you condemn me to quicklime in a prison ward? Will you deprive Georgina of even the little comfort she may find in putting flowers on my grave? Oh God, what can I say to give you courage? If you have no pity for me, have pity for Georgina and my son. If pity is not enough, will not your own fear drive you to obedience? Roderick, you have sworn to obey me. If you break your oath, the weight of 500 years of allegiance will haunt you. Roderick, no, forgiveness of mine can save you from the certain carrion crows which will wait to watch your tongue rot from your mouth. Roderick, for the love of God, obey me. Poor devil! Oh God, forgive him and forgive me. Marylda was standing upright, her eyes wide open. Roderick is lying on the floor. The terrible sound is him sobbing. His head is hidden by his arms. His hands are pressed against his ears. Hector looks at him with compassion and then turns away, as though he were very tired. He moves the trestles aside and pulls the rocking horse forward in their place. He ties its forelegs to the iron stand so that it's steady for him to mount. Now he is standing on the saddle with a noose round his neck. He draws his dirk, kisses the blade and slides it back into the sheath. Then he kicks the rocking horse over. His body is jerking. It is so terrible to watch it jerking. Hector instinctively tries to pull the rope away from his neck, then forces his hand down to rest on the hilt of his dirk. His face is turning black. There is froth on his lips, and his tongue bulges from his mouth. Duncan would have gone to her, but Rowan held him back. "Don't move," he whispered. "We promised not to interrupt." They saw that Marylda's eyes, which had been staring at a point below the ringbolt, were now looking towards the door. "The pattern is repeated," she said. "The same pattern over and over again, from the moment they come into the room until the rope stops creaking, and there is no sound except Roderick's sobbing. This is where you must both help me with everything you've got." Rowan and Duncan leaned forward, concentrating so hard on giving strength to her that sweat was cold on their foreheads. She walked slowly across the room. "Listen to me, Hector. Please, listen, Hector." "Hector." There was a long pause, then her expression changed from intense effort to gradually increasing serenity. "Yes, my dear, I know you thought I was dead," she said gently, "but I am not a ghost. We are both alive, but I'm not married to you. Georgina is your wife, and she's waiting for you to tell her how much you love her. But first you must tell Roderick that he has nothing to fear. He won't listen to anyone except you. He only acted like a coward because he loved you too much to be able to do what you asked." "What did you ask him to do?" "That doesn't matter. The details are too trivial to be worth remembering. Tell Roderick that you are grateful for his loyalty and ask him to forgive you. Why should he forgive you? Because you tried to make him an instrument of the blind justice which you thought could conquer Emilie. You were very silly, for it would have been so much better to let yourself love Georgina. Thank you, dear Hector. Now you can be happy, because Roderick is free to go on his way in peace." She was speaking in the voice a mother uses to give confidence to a child. "My dear, if you don't believe me, come down to the Hyde and see for yourself. It is always better to see for yourself." They watched her go down the steep steps, the light of candles shining as a nimbus around her dark hair. They went quietly forward and looked down into the little room. She was standing beside the stone shelf on which a body she once loved had mouldered for nearly 50 years. "How could my body be here, Hector? I am alive. You can feel me holding your hand. But I never hated you. The hatred is only part of the nightmare from which you have awakened. Here there are only carnations and candles. I put them here because long ago someone was unhappy in this place. Now there is no more sorrow, only the kind flames and the living flowers." They saw her lead someone they could not see back to the nursery, where the rocking horse rested in the moonlight. She stood aside to let Hector, impatient to return to his love, run down the turret stair. She opened the window and set the silver sconce on the wide sill. "A signal to Robbie," she said. "He is waiting to pipe them home." Hand in hand, the three, whose love for each other was the key that had unlocked the prisons of the lonely, looked out across the quiet field of Cloud. Together they listened to the proud music as Robbie played his Laird and his lady across the river. So, that was the end of this lovely book. She wrote books for children, The Scarlet Fish and Red Skin Morning and other story. But for me, her most wonderful books were her books about her previous lives. The Winged Pharaoh, Life as Carola, which was in Italy, 1504 she was born, and a Winged Pharaoh plays thousands of years ago, and her whole narrative is very fascinating. Anyway, I'm sorry I finished this one. Have a good Monday.